if we don't want to be in a situation where we're all going on election day and something goes wrong, whether willful or unintentional, we've got to vote early.
Keeping our republic is on the line, and it requires patriots with great passion, dedication, and eternal vigilance to preserve our freedoms. Jenny Beth Martin is the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. She is an author, a filmmaker, and one of Time Magazine's most influential people in the world. But the title she is most proud of is mom to her boy-girl twins. She has been at the forefront, fighting to protect America's core principles for more than a decade. Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
When it comes to Arizona politics, the big question is, what the heck is going on there? My next guest is perhaps one of the best people to answer that question. Gina Swoboda is heavily involved in the state of Arizona, and she wears many different hats. In this episode, I guarantee you'll walk away with a greater understanding of Arizona than you ever have before. And I think you'll also gain a little more hope for the future of this beautiful state. Gina Swoboda, thank you so much for joining us today. You wear so many different hats, and usually when I'm talking to you, we're like, okay, which hat is she going to be wearing and how do I introduce her? But I want to make sure that people know that you understand everything about Arizona, that you are the executive director of Voter Reference Foundation. You used to work in the Secretary of State's office in Arizona. You are a vice chairman in the Republican Party in Arizona. And you are an activist, and you also are you're an expert on how to make a difference and to really take people who are trying to win elections and show them how to secure elections and how to win elections.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Miss Jenny Beth. I appreciate that. I do. I have many hats. I have friends that tell me they're going to buy a different hat for each of my hats. And I don't know if anyone out there remembers Bartholomew Cubbins. There was a children's book when we were very young, and his many hats. So yes, God put me in multiple places, like a node. I think of it like a node. You know, you have the knowledge to give to people to educate them on how to achieve what they want in elections, in the process, and that transitions into politics, 100%.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to get to know you over the last several years and to learn from you, and then to help teach other people as well. And I hope we can do some of that today.
Right on.
Let's start with Voter Reference Foundation, because that's more national. And then we'll go into Arizona, and then we'll go into Maricopa. So that'll kind of be the structure for today. So nationally, there is Voter Reference Foundation. You are the executive director, and you are doing things not just for Arizona, but around the country. Tell people what is Voter Reference Foundation, and then we'll talk about how they can use it locally.
Thank you. So Voter Reference Foundation is a nonprofit. We are dedicated to promoting election transparency, and a primary focus of my mission is to publish the voter rolls for the entire country, to put them online for the public for free, and to do that forever. So under the National Voter Registration Act, the public has oversight of voter list maintenance, and the issue the public has is they can't get the files. They don't know how to get the files. And then they're very large. You know, it's a big database file.
What are voter rolls? What do you mean when you say that?
Thank you. So every election starts with who's registered to vote, who's eligible to cast their ballot. And then after the election, you get a vote credit in your history that you have cast a ballot. And the list of every eligible voter over time, it'll show you canceled, you moved, in some states your party affiliation, in some states not. When did you register? That is all contained in a list that is commonly referred to as the voter rolls.
Okay, and those are usually maintained at a local or a state level, correct?
Correct. They're public records. It's a common misperception. People think a state runs an election. A state does not run an election, nor, I would say, would we wish that they do so. Counties run elections. Local jurisdictions run elections. So in Arizona, there are 15 counties. There are 15 county recorders, and those county recorders are responsible to maintain the list of all the voters who are eligible, and then as their profile changes over time.
Okay, so your organization, Voter Reference Foundation, is working to acquire these voter rolls from the states around the country and make it
Correct.
available online. And why is that important?
So I would say particularly I've always been passionate about voter list maintenance and elections process. I'm nerdly in that way that God gave me. After a few of the past election cycles, I think the public at large has become aware, particularly as more states move to mail balloting. Arizona does this very well. We've done this for a long time. We have a mail ballot list. So if you're an eligible voter and you sign up, we'll mail you a ballot. You send it back. You drop it off. During COVID, a lot of states that had no experience doing mail balloting attempted to do so to ameliorate the risk to people. I'm sure they had great intentions. But then you had, tens of millions, upwards of 100 million ballots throughout the United States going out to addresses. If the voter list is not accurate, now you have ballots in the mail going to locations where this voter does not reside. And election mail by law is in most states, and in fact, I believe in all states, is not forwardable. So there are just ballots going out. Cycle after cycle, I get phone calls from all over the country from people saying they received a ballot at their home for a person who has not lived there. I've lived here 20 years. I don't know who this person is. And then they just start getting mail for this person, election mail. And it's unsettling. So it's hugely important. The entire security of the election depends upon that list being accurate.
So then when you get it and you put it online, and that is what you're doing, right?
Yes.
You're getting the list. You're
Yes.
not just, are you holding the list and keeping it private, or what are you doing with that?
Right on. So I acquire the list, the certified list, right? So these are certified election records straight from the election official. There's another piece of federal legislation called HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, and that seeks to have one person in every state, one official, be designated as the chief election official. That was passed after the 2001, disputed election in 2000. So the focus of HAVA is we want there to be a statewide voter registration database. So while we discussed all these counties and local jurisdictions, in Wisconsin, it's 1,800 almost jurisdictions run the elections. There's a lot of clerks. They work very hard. God bless them. So Wisconsin as an example, they each have a list. They conduct their election, and then they send their data files up to the mothership, which is the Wisconsin Elections Commission. And the Wisconsin Elections Commission is consolidating all that data so that if a member of the public wants to acquire a data file, rather than reach out to 1,800 jurisdictions, you contact the Wisconsin Elections Commission, you get the file. So I reach out to the chief election official, I get a certified copy of the file. I do not clean the file in any way. So that means when you look, and we'll talk about the website, you'll see people who appear to be 200 years old. And the likely reason for that is that when a clerk of some sort was processing their voter registration, they couldn't read the birthday. So they enter like 01/01/1900 as a placeholder. And then they're not coming back and cleaning that up once they verified it. So I've seen names of characters from Lord of the Rings. It is possible that someone loves Aragorn and has changed their name to Aragorn. So like we have Cher, we have Sade, we might have Shaka Khan, we might have Aragorn. And it's possible that that's an error that, somebody put that in and a clerk processed that. So I take the data exactly as it exists and I put it online with the certified chain of custody. So if you go to voteref.com, VOTEREF.com, that's where the files live. I've got 34 states and the District of Columbia live. I'm starting to upload, I call them archives. So the files from 2022's election are starting to go up now. So if you click a state and then you click elections, you click a state, you can see a drop down for which file do you want to look at. Do you want to look at January of 2021? Do you want to look at November of 2022? And so people can kind of do regression over time and see how is the list changing. It's a very useful tool.
That is great. So when they go to that website, how do they use it? What are they what would the average listener want to do when they go to that website?
So it depends what hat you're wearing. So I would say for the average person, a member of the public that is seeking to do their oversight under the National Voter Registration Act, you would want to perhaps look at the list for your state. One of the first things I think anyone should do that's interested in voter roll cleanup, you have to understand the statutes in your state. What an inactive voter is completely different in various states. And at the sister site, voterreferencefoundation.com, I have worked with my team to helpfully compile what are the voter registration statutes in your state. So if you go to voterreferencefoundation.com, top of the page has a red bar and it says voter registration guides. And if you click there for every state in the country, it tells you what are the statutes for voter registration and where I have it, which any state I mapped, I have this. What does each status code mean? For example, inactive, right? So if you were a person living in Wisconsin and you say, you know what, I'm going to get involved, I'm going to get engaged, I want to do my oversight. You go to voteref.com, you click Wisconsin. Now you're looking at a list of voters. You can filter them by status. So if you wanted to say how many voters are inactive in Wisconsin, you'd click to inactive, but you have to understand what inactive means. I have heard people say the number of inactive voters in Wisconsin exceeds the population of Wisconsin that's eligible to vote. That's that's accurate, but it's a little misleading because inactive in Wisconsin is canceled in Arizona. If you're in an inactive status in Wisconsin, you can't vote. That means you're deceased or you've been convicted of a felony and your rights are not restored. In Arizona, when you see inactive, you can vote. You can still vote. That means we have a notice somehow that you moved, a piece of mail came back to the recorder. So we're starting this process to eventually get you to canceled, but you're inactive. So the very first thing a person should do if they want to get engaged and they want to look at voter rolls is check what the statutes are. Then the next thing, like let's say I'm me and I live on my block and I'm just, gung-ho to help clean things up. You can search by address. So, for example, it would be highly unlikely if you put in the address of a single family home on your block that there would be 150 registrants in it. You can search by address and you can see who is registered at this house. So if you know, and this is the example I always use, there's some innocent person out there named Sheila that, I just picked the name Sheila. If you have a sister-in-law named Sheila who is very energized about voting and your nephew Jimmy is, let's say, in university in Georgia, and you're like, I know Jimmy voted in Georgia, but I don't know. Sheila might have gotten carried away because she's always talking about how she knows how Jimmy would vote. You can look at your sister-in-law's house, her address in Ohio, see if Jimmy is registered there and see if there's a vote credit for Jimmy in that election. And then if you know where Jimmy is in Georgia, you can look up Jimmy. Now, if Jimmy is the same Jimmy and you're confident it's him, you might want to call your sister-in-law Sheila and say, Sheila, you can't vote twice. He can't vote twice. Don't do that. But so, yes, you can compare multiple states to see if people are, I know this is a commonly held perception. And people need to be mindful also, residency is a state of mind in most states. It's, do you intend to remain here? That's what it says in Arizona. So when you find something and you think you have found something and you've done the research and you know what the statutes are, you would want to reach out to your local election official, to your county clerk, to your county recorder and say, I have these records. It looks to me like, there's a shenanigan. I've had reports from people using the site. Nevada was my first state up. So I received an email from a gentleman. His wife still had an active voter registration in Nevada, and it looked like she was voting, but she had moved to North Carolina like 10 years earlier. So they reported that to the clerk, and I would presume the appropriate steps were taken to clean it up. You have to own your record, right? I moved... You could probably hear the New York. It's been a long time since I left New York. But I canceled my voter registration before I moved. Most people, you're caught up in moving, you don't necessarily think of that. So you can look up yourself, your family, your loved one that's maybe in a nursing care facility. We had a lot of issues in Wisconsin in the 2020 election. These are our vulnerable voters. So if you have a relative that's in a memory care unit in another state, you might wish to check the voter registration to make sure that you don't see a vote credit, because someone who has been deemed incompetent by a court is not eligible to vote, and no one is allowed to cast a ballot on their behalf. So there should not be a vote record for your relative.
That's very useful information. So what are those websites again?
VoterReferenceFoundation.com has toolkits and guides and scorecards. We score states on how transparent their data is. And then VoteRef, VoterEref.com is where the voter files live.
Okay, very good. Now let's switch hats and talk about what's going on in Arizona.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful Arizona that we love so much. So we've had a couple or three elections where the way they were conducted with regard to Maricopa County has, in my personal opinion, resulted in a complete loss of confidence now in the voters. It's gotten progressively worse since 2018, but after the 22 election day, I can only use the word fiasco. You know, I love our election officials. I was an election official.
Polite term to use.
Yes, I'm editing myself. I am censoring myself. But
Right.
it really was a fiasco. So there are a lot of voters who want to vote in person. I happen to be one of them. And, you know, sometimes for work, I have to use a mail ballot. That's an option we have in Arizona. That's the law. But there are people for whom going on election day is of great importance to them. After the 2020 election, some people, particularly on the right side of the political divide, had such a loss of confidence that they wanted to either hold their mail ballot and drop it in person at a polling place on election day, or they wanted to walk in on election day and vote in person. And that is absolutely our right. You have that right in Arizona. We are not an all-mail state. I would encourage our policy folks and the elections officials to understand we are not going to be an all-mail state. Half of the people of Arizona do not want to go to all-mail, only mail. That being the case, there is an obligation of the election officials to make sure that the election day process is a good one. And there's been a total failure, which has just gotten worse over the last 3 cycles, and it was catastrophic in 2022. So by 9:30 in the morning on election day, so I was in a room with great attorneys that are there to make sure things go well. People are, you know, checking ID, and we take calls from observers, and other states call them poll watchers, right? So by 9:30, I had multiple locations down. The on-site tabulators, there is not a requirement in Title 16 is where our election laws live in Arizona. There's not a requirement that says you must have on-site tabulation on election day. Tabulation is the act. I'm putting my paper ballot into the machine, and it's counting the votes. It's tabulating as I'm putting it in the machine. Many counties in Arizona do not have, and it's shocking to a lot of people, 20 years after HAVA passed, HAVA that we talked about, Help America Vote Act, is grant money, federal grant money that's been going to states for over 20 years to enable them to do 2 main things here. One is create your statewide voter registration database, and another is to purchase equipment to secure elections. So from my position, we should have on-site tabulation on election day in every county in Arizona, and we don't. Some counties, you walk in, you get a paper ballot, you drop it in a bucket. They take the bucket back. The reason that's a problem is if you've made a mistake on your ballot and you have overvoted, like let's say House reps, you're supposed to pick 2. What if you picked 3? If I stick it into the machine is going to spit it back out at me and say, Gina, you have an overvote. And then I have the opportunity to spoil my ballot and correct it. That doesn't exist in mail voting, and that doesn't exist if all of this tabulation happens at central count. But Maricopa has had on-site election day tabulation as long as I've lived here, and I've lived here for 28 years now, okay? So people waited. They had concerns. They went in. the tabulators weren't taking the ballots. And we've had investigations, what happened after the fact. And the position of Maricopa County elections is that what went on is the fusers and the ballot on demand printers didn't get hot enough for the ink to fully adhere to the 20-inch long paper ballot, such that when people put the ballot in the tabulator was rejecting it because it could not read it. Okay. So now all of these people that are waiting online that already had a concern, which is a lot of them, not all of them, but they had a concern. That's why they waited till election day, or they were a person for whom no amount of hard sell of you should really do a mail ballot has worked for these people. They don't want to do that. They want to go on election day. They're online. They have a concern. Ballots are literally being spit back out of the tabulator, and the polling workers are instructed to say, drop it in door 3 and we will, duplicate. Right.
I'm sorry.
I know. We will it's like a really bad version of The Price is Right. Or let's make a deal. Let's not. Let's tabulate. So drop it in door 3 and we're going to duplicate it for you back at Central Count. So if you were already concerned, this is not sounding like a great option for you. So now the lines are growing. More and more locations went down. It was over 64% of the locations. Okay. I can just say personally, in my party hat, with my county party chair, had conversations in emails in the weeks leading up to election day with the elections director of Maricopa County. And I made very clear my position via the county chair that we knew we were going to have record in-person turnout from the party on the right on election day. And I said over and over again, are you sure that you have enough toner? Because in 2020, we had the same problem. It was just limited in scope. I had 3 vote centers. So Maricopa is using a vote center. Okay. So which this whole problem, and remind me, if you will, to come back to the ballot on demand precinct polling place issue, because this whole thing would be obviated if we were doing that, but we're not. So in 2020, I had 3 vote centers in the Queen Creek area in Congressman Biggs' district where this happened. All of the ballots were spitting back out and they were putting them all in door 3. And I had an observer call because the staff, and again, poll workers are, I think, good-hearted people, but some of them are new. The training, as much as you can try to train people, you can't cover everything. At that point in 2020, they were inadvertently telling people to put it in the spoiled ballot door, because there's door 3 to duplicate, and then there's a door where you're spoiling your ballot, which is why you have to have poll watchers and observers. The observer was alert and was like, oh no, and called me, and I was like, no. And I called the elections director. All of those ballots would never have been counted if that had continued. So we've had this issue before. So I am, weeks leading up to the election, everybody on the planet I mean, even if you were out on an oil rig in the middle of the Gulf, if you were from Arizona, you were aware that people had a loss of confidence and were planning to vote on election day. This was not a secret.
Push to vote.
There was a push by people,
a big group of people to vote
that were like vote on election day.
Right.
So knowing that you're going to have record turnout, and the conversation was going back and forth with the elections director. We're going to have record turnout. We're really concerned. Is the toner cartridge full? Are you going to run out of paper? And the response was coming back. I, election director, have benchmarked what the turnout was in 2020. And in 2020, I only had a handful of vote centers that, hit 1,200 people. And to which my response was, oh, we're going to blow that away. And that's unusual because it's a midterm. However, it's not if you take into account that, I have a third of this party that's absolutely not going to vote by mail. And their position, by the way, on the toner cartridge, which is purportedly not the issue, but their response was, well, we stress test them and we send them out and deploy them in the field at least 50% full. Okay. So then my response is, well, why don't we start the day with a full toner cartridge and then use the 50% full cartridge as the backup. And when you switch out the full one for the 50% one, then you can go to your great courier and your troubleshooter, because they're like, we've got it covered. We've got troubleshooters. There's going to be no problem.
Why don't you just give full cartridges,
this
period?
Is what
elections are cartridge isn't that much money.
Yes.
Okay, so we threw away a 50% full one and we start the day full and we replace
100%.
It full. And that's silliness.
This is, I think, a core of the problem. And what I always say is you have to have the will to run an election. If Maricopa County is spending, the last time I checked, less than half of 1% of its budget on elections, and elections are one of the enumerated duties that they are supposed to, I am not interested personally in the temperature of the concrete outside ASU. And I do not think that we elected the Board of Supervisors to measure the temperature of the concrete outside ASU. And if they wish to do that, that's up to the voters to decide whether or not they think that's a great thing. And I love the planet. I live on it too. I want it to go well. But I do know that they 100% were elected to run an election. And I do know that we've had 3 election cycles in a row where there have been serious process issues, and it has now been catastrophic. And to say, to come out repeatedly and say this was the best election ever and this was a minimal problem and it was addressed is just is garbage. That like gaslighting,
it's an insult.
It is an insult, and it frustrates people. It is not getting us to a place where voters can have confidence and participate. And my rock bottom concern in all of these things is people will stop participating. I can't keep telling people, don't worry, like it's going to be okay. If the people that are tasked with executing the election refuse to admit their failures, their grievous failures. Today on Twitter is a report from OKI, who is the printer company. So Maricopa County retained a former state Supreme Court justice named Ruth McGregor. Hats off to a wonderful person, to do an investigation, an independent investigation of what happened. They released a report. Oki had a fuser that you couldn't, take it out, and they didn't tell us that this pound paper wouldn't work. Oki issued a statement saying, okay, nobody contacted us. You did this investigation. Not a single person contacted them. The findings on the fuser being, that's not true on this printer model. The manufacturer specs that come with the printers clearly tell you don't use this pound paper. And they expect the county attorney's office to issue a correction. So now we are in June, and we are still having problems with understanding whether or not that report has addressed the concerns. If the reports that are coming out about what happened are still being questioned by the person who manufactured the equipment, it's the loss of confidence is profound. And I think that what we have now is it's overflowing into kind of other realms, into the political realm, if you will.
Well, I think that that's true. Not even do I think it's true. It is true. And in Georgia, I think that by and large, the election in 22 was an improvement over the election in 2020. And that's good, right? So
yes.
I'm not saying it was perfect. And everyone from Georgia, don't worry, I'm not naive to the problems in Georgia. In Arizona, we can't say that. It's so much worse. But the problems in Georgia, in Arizona and in Maricopa, it's not even all of, well, it is a good bit of Arizona, but especially Maricopa, it is having an effect around the entire country because people are going, well, I don't even know if it matters if I vote, because if I vote, my vote won't count. And even if I vote here in Ohio or Iowa or wherever, my vote is going to be canceled out by the really bad problems in Maricopa. And that's, 100%. It's
unacceptable.
It is unacceptable. It is grievous issues.
And it's shaking the bedrock. This group of people is very fond of talking about protecting democracy. And we're in a constitutional republic. But the form of our elections, we have a representative democracy. Yeah. So maybe less time talking about saving our democracy, protecting our democracy, and a little more time invested in executing the process well. That is the bedrock of the foundation of that process. Because if we don't have that, we don't have confidence. It doesn't matter how many times you hashtag things at people. They're just going to kind of drop off and not participate. And historically, that's just not good.
And that would be considered voter suppression. If we were talking to Stacey Abrams, she would say that you're suppressing the vote if you do something that discourages people from voting.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And the Department of Justice acknowledges in their Civil Rights Division for elections, there's a Civil Rights Division within that if you do anything to suppress the right to vote, that is a violation of a person's civil rights. And yet that is what's happening here. And it is the effect that it is happening here. Much more than a stupid meme that might have been posted on Twitter. I was just going to say,
it's my understanding some guy that did a meme, right, like prosecuted. And now we have people that are just continuously told it's fine. And and one of the things that I think is very reprehensible is there's a quite obvious attitude in the Maricopa County election official community, which includes the county attorney's office. Again, I have mad respect, mad props, as the kids would say. However, at the close of an election contest trial for a candidate, one of the closing arguments from the Maricopa County attorney was basically, and he said, and I have respect for the man, but he said, you reap what you sow. Like, so in effect, it is the fault of the voters who tried to vote on election day that things went wrong on election day. And if they had just, been smart enough to take their mail ballot like a good voter should, because that's what we told you to do, this wouldn't happen to you. But you insist on listening to people that, in his view, cast aspersions on the elections process and said election day is not safe. So that's what you get. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable to talk to the voters like that.
No, it's not acceptable. And that attorney, and I don't know the attorney, and I don't have to worry about having respect for the attorney like you do because I don't live here. But frankly, that attorney is failing at upholding the Constitution. The job isn't just about scoring points and winning in court. The job is about making sure that what you are doing is the right thing and that you're upholding the Constitution of Arizona and that you're upholding the Constitution of the United States. And when you're worried about winning in court at all costs, rather than making sure that you and the county have done the right thing the entire time and held the proper election, it's disgraceful. Amen. And honestly, I have said this all along about what I saw happen in 2022 before the results were in. As I was watching what unfolded on election day and watching the videos and the issues that were coming in, I said, it doesn't even matter who's declared the winner. It doesn't matter if the candidates, the Republicans win or the Democrats win. It doesn't matter. This election needs to be redone. It is a disaster, and there's neither side is going to have faith in the outcome of this election if their candidate did not win.
Absolutely. And I mean, and then you're going to take office without a mandate, because regardless of what the canvas of the vote says the vote count was, and polling is showing not just a majority of the party on the right, but like nationally. Like if you poll Rasmussen, it's like looking nationally, people of the party on the left that happen to be, in this case, the party that won the entire executive branch out here, think there was a problem. So you can't ignore it and hope it goes away and talk through it and just basically, pat voters on the head and call them ignorant and send them home because they don't know any better. And this is kind of the pattern that's been developing. And just to circle back to this polling precinct issue, this will keep happening if we keep using ballot on demand printers. That's what this failure was. Okay. And the reason for that is this vote center model, right? So on a larger scale, people like precinct voting. So here's what I don't understand. And I do understand, but I think it's a political thing. But let's present it this way. There are advocates who are constantly talking about choice. So the people in Arizona, the county election officials, we want choice for the voters, right? We want you to have options. That's why we want the mail ballot. Well, precinct polling places make it easier for you to vote because it's closer to your house. It is literally the precinct around your area. It's designed that way.
Usually it's not even more than a mile radius from your house. You can if you can get there. You know your area where you live, you know how to get there. That is your area where you can go. The move to vote centers, they're claiming the advocates that like this model are like, well, now you can vote anywhere. Okay, well that's a point. However, in Maricopa County, when you look at where the vote centers are, and when they present the election plan, the elections director for election day voting in Maricopa County is always very proud when he's presenting it to the Board of Supervisors. They do this on YouTube live stream to say, look, I put them all along the light rail. Look how many there are along the light rail. Well, you know what's not along the light rail? A lot of elderly suburban voters are not along the light rail because the light rail doesn't go there. So what has happened, if you look at the disbursement of these vote centers, is it is making people travel much farther than they would have had to travel in a precinct. Now they're going outside their area, they're outside their neighborhood, they have to have a car or they're not going to get there.
it is my personal opinion that this is a Kass-Sunstein nudge effort to push people to voting by mail. Because if I'm an elderly suburban voter and I don't drive anymore, I can no longer get to my voting location. I now have to go down to the vote center, or I can send it in the mail. And, the legislature out here worked very hard to push through some process-driven policy that was moderate policy. It was not political, to improve election day experience for the voters. One of them was tabulate early ballots on site. People compare us to Florida often, and they say, how can Florida, who has a larger population, have their results in, and Arizona, looking at you, Maricopa County, is taking 3.5 weeks? What people need to understand about Arizona is we don't have early voting. We have early mail voting. So in the 27 days of early voting, you can go into any one of these vote centers because your precinct's gone, right? And that's the other thing. If you want vote centers, do it in addition to precincts. Don't do it in lieu of precincts. We had a bill for that. Here comes the veto, okay? Then we tried to say, let's tabulate on site the early ballots so that these voters who want to get the ballot in the mail, it gives them time to do research, they fill it out. That's all great. They want to walk in, show their ID, and tabulate it. Counties don't like that either. I tried to give them $10 million in a bill, the legislature, to add polling locations, to have just one location in the 2 largest counties. So that's just Maricopa and Pima. That's Phoenix and Tucson for folks out there. Have one location that has early ballot tabulation per legislative district. And they still don't want that. They still came out against that. They're coming out against anything that would improve the election day process. And they are doing that, in my opinion, because they want us to go to all mail. So anything that's going to make election day better, they are going to come out, and their official position is, no, we reject this bill. And they tell, and we pass it through the legislature. I've got a 1-vote majority for the party of the right in both houses, but they're going to get vetoed. So you can't have a vote center model, which is everyone can vote everywhere, without ballot on demand printers, because everyone's got a different school district, a different water district. So what happens is you walk into a vote center, scan your license, and the ballot on demand is printing your ballot for you based on where you live. Hans von Spakovsky always tells us.
From Heritage Foundation.
From Heritage, and who worked in the voting rights division of the DOJ. The gold standard for every precinct, you should have 110 to 125% of the paper ballots pre-ordered for every voter you have. You cannot have pre-ordered paper ballots in a vote center model, because I have no idea who's going to walk in, and there are tens of thousands of ballot styles in a county as big as Maricopa. So the refusal to revert to precinct polling places means we cannot pre-order ballots, which means we're always going to be at the mercy of these printers, and this equipment is not tested, regulated, certified in the same way that other election equipment is. It's outside the scope of logic and accuracy or election equipment certification. So it's going to happen again, and it's just kind of been growing. So I think it's a mistake. The vote center model is a problem. Also, think about this. And this is part of what happened. How can I predict how many voters are going to walk in to any given location? I don't know if, Lisa was going to see Aunt Susie that day and she's like, oh, look, there's a vote center. I think I'll just vote. I don't know where people work. I don't have a record of where they work, how close they are to where they work. It's a shot in the dark to be able to gauge what your turnout is going to be in a ballot on demand vote center model. Whereas in a precinct place, you know exactly what the turnout's going to be because it's restricted to the voters that live in the precinct, which was upheld in Brnovich v. DNC. That was the ballot harvesting and the precinct-based voting.
Wait, explain what do you mean by that?
Sorry, I went off on my tangent. So Arizona passed a ballot trafficking ban, ballot harvesting ban. So we don't want people going door to door. Oh, give me your ballot, Jerry. I'm really excited that you want this job, and my boss sent me here to get your ballot and watch you vote. No. So we don't want other people collecting people's mail ballots. Part of that case was the precinct-based polling restrictions. If you are in a precinct-based model, so Gina lives in precinct 123, Gina votes in precinct 123, or Gina could go to any vote center. If Gina goes to precinct 125 and it's not a vote center, that when you check in, the clerks tell you, they're very carefully trained, and I've been a polling place worker as well. they say, Gina, this is not your precinct. You need, and they will print the address out on a little tape and say, go to this precinct. Or if you had a hybrid where vote centers and precincts, you could say, or you can go to any one of these vote centers any day of early voting, right? But let's say it's election day. If I insist on voting in the wrong precinct, I'm going to have to vote a provisional ballot, and it is not going to count because I have decided willfully to vote in the wrong precinct after I have been informed I'm in the wrong precinct. So we got sued over that. They didn't like that. They want us to count all these provisionals of people who decided to go to the wrong place.
And that's important because if they're getting a ballot, are they getting the ballot for their precinct?
No.
So then they're voting for school board or city council for people that won't even represent them.
That's 100%.
And if you care about democracy, you don't.
That's right.
You shouldn't want that.
Right. Why do I want people to get a ballot to have a voice in a race that doesn't affect them for a jurisdiction they don't live in? 100%. Thank you for that. So that is why we will not count those. And that was part of the Brnovich v. DNC case that went to the Supreme Court, and that was upheld. And as a result, as soon as that decision came down, Pima County, which was up until 2022 a precinct-based polling model, shifted to vote center model. And people don't realize Pima County had a catastrophic failure as well in 2022. But because Pima County doesn't have the on-site tabulation on election day, they were dropping them in the bucket. When they got back to central counts where the big tabulators are, it was spitting the ballots back out just like it was in Maricopa because they had ballot on demand printers. There was a problem. Pima County duplicated 22,000 ballots in a handful of days after election day. And most people don't realize it happened because the machines weren't on site, so the voters didn't see it. It happened back at central count.
When you're duplicating, what is duplication? Just explain that.
So it's manual in Pima County. So it's literally people sitting together at a table, and they're supposed to be like independent and Democrat or Republican and Democrat or Libertarian and independent, not one party. And they're looking at the ballot, the paper ballot, and they're like, what was the voter intent? What was the voter trying to do? And then they recreate it on a new paper ballot. So they're literally going to go, they voted for Jack, they voted for Jill, they voted for Bob. And then if there's one where they can't tell, they have to come to an agreement about what did that person mean. So they are literally recreating ballot after ballot after ballot. Yes. And so to do 22,000 with limited staff in that time window, you're likely to make errors because we're human beings. Yeah, 100%.
So that is a huge problem. And what you're saying is that Pima County, once the Supreme Court said that the ballots don't have to be counted if the voter willfully voted in the wrong precinct, instead of making sure that they continued and had the precinct model, they were just like, okay, we'll get rid of the precinct model and go to the vote center model. And
then had the ballot on demand printers and then had this kind of, again, catastrophic experience.
In the vote center model, I just think it's very, very problematic. There's nothing. It is much more cumbersome for me to go to a vote center that is 5 or 10 miles away from my house. It may be closer to my work, but then I've got to get to work early or leave work late or go during lunchtime. Whereas if it is a mile from my house or the school right up the road that I pass every day going to and from my neighborhood, no matter what, and I just slide in there, vote, and slide right back out. There's nothing more convenient than that.
Right. Talk about convenience. And by the way, people said, when we do the vote center model, it's going to increase turnout. No, it has not increased turnout. It has absolutely not increased turnout. And so one of the arguments that you get from the election officials is, well, the reason we can't do the precinct polling places is because it's too hard to retain the facilities because the schools have decided that they don't want to participate anymore. And we're trying to stay away from churches, I guess because they don't want to offend anybody because they think it's offensive. So we don't have the locations. So there's a bill for that, right? So we wrote a bill. We the legislature, wrote bills that said, it's already the law in Arizona that a public school must permit use as a voting location unless they can demonstrate that there's a danger to the children. So Senator Jake Hoffman had a beautiful bill that said, okay, we're going to make it a school holiday. So now it's a school holiday, so the children are not there. So it is not a danger to the children. And you will use, if you were a public school and you had a standalone gymnasium, we will block that day out, make that a school holiday. And now, look, now everybody can go. And so the next thing, the response to that bill, and we gave them $1 million in that bill, Senator Mesnard had a similar bill where he said, okay, let's say every single local county or state government facility must permit its use as a polling place. And you can have vote centers in addition to the precincts, right? The pushback from the counties was no, and then the pushback from advocates on the left end of the spectrum was, well, now you're making it impossible. If the kids have the day off, then how am I going to get the time to go vote now? Now I can't work. So people that were not concerned about shutting down every school in the United States of America for 22 months during COVID and did not care about how those parents were going to go to work suddenly think having one day as a holiday. And these are the same people who say it should be a national holiday. So, it's just the shifting sands of the argument. If it's a national holiday to vote, then the kids aren't going to be in school. And I, when my kids were little, took them with me because I'm proud to vote. I'm so proud that we have the opportunity to vote in this country. And I think it's a hugely important thing for the kids to see you doing, your civic duty.
My parents took me to vote. I
100%.
remember standing in line going to vote in a fire station with my mom. And that's how she taught me that, this is how you actually vote. And this is what I do while I'm voting. And I did the same with my children.
And makes you more likely to participate because it's part of your civic life, your upbringing, But yeah, it's just like I've come to the conclusion after the last session of the legislature that the county election officials in the state of Arizona are not going to do anything to improve the election day process because they do not want to, because they do not have the will to continue to have in-person voting, and they want to shift us to all mail. So getting back to our Florida analogy. In Florida, when you vote early in person, you're sticking your ballot in a tabulator. In Arizona, when you vote early in person, they're handing you an envelope and a ballot. Even if you show up in person, you got 27 days. Here's your envelope and here's your ballot. Vote your ballot, put it in your envelope, seal your envelope, sign your name. So I've showed ID. Now it's going to go through signature verification anyway, because by statute, early voting in Arizona is by mail. And I had a bill for that. The bill said it's 1518. It's a great, wonderful, beautiful bill. And it's going to go to Governor Hobbs probably in a week. And what that bill said is if you walked in during early voting and showed your ID, and you had to show your ID or it wouldn't have generated that ballot on demand and that envelope, we don't need to do signature verification because we already know who you are because you showed us your ID. And by the way, Maricopa's been doing that already, even though that's not the law. This is part of what happens with Maricopa. This is why the outlying counties, to your earlier point, are frustrated. They call it the great state of Maricopa. Maricopa has a bigger budget, so they can buy equipment and they can do this, and they just do, I don't know how else to say it, they just do what they want. They've been not fully signature verifying those early in-person ballots. That's why you see videos like click, 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 right? But that's what the law says. And we have a process in the United States where if you don't like what the law says, you go to the legislature and you fix it. You don't just do things your own way because for expedience, because you're you and you're the great state of Maricopa. So Florida's, all of those early ballots have already been tabulated. They're on a little digital card, and all they have to do is stick it in the reader and get the count. In Arizona, every single early person, whether you did it in person or in the mail, all has to go through signature verification. Then we got to pull it out of the envelope, flatten it, tabulate it. If there was an error on it, duplicate it, adjudicate it. I mean, I will tell you, because these bills are getting vetoed, I think that this election for 2024, I think the entire world, because Arizona's 11 electoral votes are incredibly important for who's going to determine the presidency. The world, as cares about who's the president, is going to be sitting like this for like a good 3 weeks, and
a good for a month.
Yeah, for a month. And given what happened to the people that tried to vote early in person, I'm going to have more people. The biggest problem, and what I tell people is, of all of the beautiful options, and do what works for your heart on how you vote, the quote worst way for the purposes of getting your results in on time is to take that mail ballot and drop it off inside on election day, because they stopped doing signature verification to shift to election day operations. So now you're going to have, in the last cycle, we had 300,000 people do that. In Maricopa alone, 300,000 people walked in on election day, dropped it in the bucket, in the envelope. So it had a, now what should have happened is the county recorder staff supposed to pick up those drop-offs, take them back to central count, log how many there are, and only then can you take them to your vendor, and which in the case of Maricopa is Runbeck, to scan the signatures. They said they were overwhelmed. I'm sure they were. And so were the voters in their perfect election. They were so overwhelmed at the number of drop-offs, they didn't bother to go back to central count, although that is required by statute. They just drove them straight to Runbeck and dropped them off. So now, the chain of custody is screwy. But because of what happened with people who tried to vote in person in Maricopa, I predict as we sit here that the number of people that are going to walk in their mail ballot and drop it is going to be in excess of 300,000, could possibly be 400,000 or more. So we're not going to have like 3.5 weeks. We're going to have like 4.5 weeks if this continues. And you have to have the will to make the process better. They are invested in not making the process better for voting in person because they have their own plan. I'm sure it's easier to have all of the votes come to you. Again, love election officials, but you don't have to have that job. If it's too stressful to go find poll workers and go find a facility, we're trying to make law to help you.
If it's too hard for you to follow the law, then
there's a lot of jobs in the world. I hear that the vacancy rate is quite high.
I've been interviewing border sheriffs as part of my my podcast, and one of the problems we talk about is the lawlessness, the fact that when it comes to the border, the law is just not being followed at all. And what you're describing is even more lawlessness. It's people who are not elected, they're not accountable to anyone, they're employees, and they're just changing. They're not adhering to the law, and by not adhering to the law, they have the effect of changing the law on a whim, on their whim, and there's no checks and balances with that.
100%. And in we have the Purcell principle. So for many years, we had a county recorder in Maricopa named Helen Purcell. She was tremendous. She started mail voting. The Supreme Court of the United States has the Purcell principle, which is like if you're too close to the election, you don't want to start to change the process because you can confuse the voters. So to have one county that's just kind of doing their own thing out there when that's not what the process is confusing to the voters. And we have a problem with this because we wind up in litigation. And the problem when you try to go to litigation is if you try to argue about, look, they're not following the process. They didn't follow the process in 2020. They didn't follow Maricopa. They didn't follow the process in 2022. Chain of custody, signature verifying, mail ballots early, etc. Okay, the way they do it. For I can hear in my head the election director arguing when you're ready. If you go too early, they will say it's not ripe. If you try to go when they start, if you wait until early voting starts 27 days before Election Day in Arizona, and you see them start to do things, because we have observers, the observers right away are like, Gina, they're not putting serial numbers on the duplicated ballots, 2020. If I tried to go to court then, they would say it's latches because the process has already started.
The courts would.
Yes. And so you have a standing issue. It's too early. It's too late. The people have to understand that there is a way to enforce the law. To your point about what the border sheriffs are saying and what everyone is going through, it's not a suggestion, it's the law. And when I grew up, and I'm a Gen Xer, ignorance of the law was no excuse. If I did something that I didn't know was unlawful because there are so many laws, I would still get prosecuted because it's no excuse that I don't know. So clearly these people know what the rules are and they're just choosing not to follow them. And there thus far has not been any successful attempt to force them to abide by the rules. And while they may think that's just hunky-dory and they're going to keep going on their way, the total collapse in confidence will have a knock-on effect that is just very detrimental to the people and to the whole country.
Okay, so now that everyone in the audience is going, okay, Arizona is a total fiasco. Being very polite because my parents might be listening. I have my children, but it's a total fiasco. So let's take a step back and understand that all hope is not lost, and that you and Tea Party Patriots Action and many other groups, the Election Integrity Network, our friends over there, Heritage Foundation, many others are working to make a difference with this, and I'm leaving off a whole lot. Oh, and probably here in Arizona, the Arizona Free Enterprise.
Yes, AZ Free Enterprise, the Arizona Tea Party, Easy AZ, Save Arizona. There are a lot of groups engaged, and so this is the penultimate question that I get now is, tell me why I should vote. And I would caution people. There are folks whose job, they used to say, don't feed the trolls when we first started having like comment boards. There are people out there in the world who get paid to demoralize you and go onto threads where you are and say, yeah, there's no point in voting.
By the way, we know now from the Department of Homeland Security and work the Media Research Center has done that the Department of Homeland Security has given grants out
fantastic.
For claiming that groups like mine and others are domestic terrorists. At any rate, there is a new information out because of these grants that is saying that a presentation that was done at a university in Ohio, the person who was presenting the information said, we go onto these boards and work to disrupt the groups and cause chaos in the groups. And some of what we do isn't even legal. And they're being paid money from the grants from the Department of Homeland Security. But the point is that sometimes the trolls are very, very real. Yeah. And they are there. Many of them are there for the specific purpose of disrupting our organizations and causing harm to our organizations. I just want to highlight that.
Thank you. And it's frightening because there's the First Amendment. It was not a suggestion. It was
correct.
One of the foundation of the bedrock. But yes, so for people that are demoralized, and they have every right to be, there is no way to rationalize what took place in Maricopa in 2022. The gaslighting is profound. The refusal of the officials to acknowledge their failures is disgraceful. However, I'm going to come back to my New York Lotto tagline, okay? You have to be in it to win it. You are making it easier for them if you are not voting. The 2016 election is illustrative in this regard. I do not believe that the party of the left saw that candidate and that wave coming in 2016. There was a financial imbalance in the funding to the campaigns, and it was truly just a kind of an earth-shattering turnout model. People who believe that the whole thing is kind of jerry-rigged against us, or us as voters, right? And us in our will, not us as a party, us as voters in our intent being demonstrated in the outcome. That's a high bar to prove. If you believe that, you need to vote harder. Yes, people laugh about that, but you do. You need to commit to you personally take 3 people that did not vote, that do not vote, that are not active, take them to the polls. Do like a Scooby-Doo van thing and say, let's all go. We're all going to vote. Do it early. Do it in one of the 27 days of early voting. In Virginia, it's 45 days of early voting. Virtually every state has a form of early voting. Commit to take your friends and your acquaintances and say, you know what? This is too important. If we get out there and we get out there early, then there's not going to be a potential shenanigan where someone else gets my mail ballot and does something else because I was there early. In Arizona, pre-2018, the Republican Party voted early by mail, and they would mail it back right away. So the pattern was the party of the right banked their votes, and then the party of the left was predominant on Election Day, but they couldn't make up the margin. After 2018, it started flipping, and then it was completely inverse by 2022. Whether you think it was intentional or you think it was a collapse of the system, you have to acknowledge that everybody waiting to vote until Election Day in Maricopa created a situation where there were long lines. If I'm an elderly voter and my precinct polling place doesn't exist and I don't have a mail ballot and I go down to the line, and this is what's interesting to me, senior citizens are not considered a protected class under the Voting Rights Act. So although you're protected in virtually every other thing in your life from discrimination, if you're 78 years old and you're trying to stand on the line and it's 3.5 hours long and you don't even know where you are because it's not your precinct polling place anymore and you can't stand anymore, there is no recourse for you. You walk away or you hobble away because you're hurt and you can't stand anymore. So if we don't want to be in a situation where we're all going on Election Day and something goes wrong, whether willful or unintentional, we've got to vote early. And but not voting is just making it easier to lose. You've got to be in it to win it. So I encourage people. There are efforts. There are many groups. We're doing education. We're working with the legislature. There's litigation. I feel strongly that there's probably going to be a lot of litigation in this 6-month window, because it has to be done ahead of time, because once you get into the election, you can't do it. And there's prayer, and that is ultimately going to decide, what happens. But you have to. God helps those who help themselves. And you have to take an affirmative step forward to make the situation better. And I just urge everybody that I know, take 3 friends, make sure you all go vote. In Arizona in 2022, turnout in Yavapai and Mojave, which are very red counties, and I know that the parties worked incredibly hard out there, it was down. From 2018 to 2022, it was down. And part of why it was down, I believe, is because people had their mail ballot on the counter, and they were going to go on election day because they had heard, I don't know, I don't trust the mail, I don't know. And then if something happens, if little Susie is sick, Mojave, these areas are spread apart. You have to drive far to get to a place to drop off your mail ballot, and you can't put it in the mail on election day. It's too late. So I think our turnout was down because some of the messaging might have inadvertently wound up with people that would have otherwise voted by mail not voting by mail. And then you had the disaster in Maricopa where people who tried to vote on election day could not effectively vote.
And once they heard that,
Yep.
because the problems were happening early, and by noon,
Yep.
it had spread not just around Arizona, but around the entire country. They may have just been like,
Not
I
even
give
tried.
up. Yeah.
We tried to go to court. We went to court to ask for the polling places to be kept open for an hour. And the judge said, no, latches. You came. It's too late now. And then extended the polling places in Navajo County, which did not have a catastrophic failure. So, yes, I do think that there are people that probably just gave up and said, "Oh, it'll be okay." And now
you can't do that.
Yeah,
You have to vote.
Yeah. We are a day after the anniversary of D-Day, and so many people. And I know everybody's heart. They've worked so hard to get the result, to get out the vote, to register people. So many people have given up so much for us. We have to keep trying, because that's what people want us to do, is to give up and go away and stop voting. And while I agree that I have talked to people that are like, basically their position is, yeah, but if you start pushing mail voting and voting early, you're doing what the counties want, because then the data is going to show, look how many people are voting early. We really don't need polling places anymore. I can give my personal assurances that as long as I am here, I will fiercely advocate, and there are plenty of people that we will stand together to make sure our polling places for election day stay open. But what I think we don't want to do, now I'm going to put on the political hat as the third vice chair. What we don't want to do is leave our people vulnerable to a catastrophic incident like that. Because if the Democrats have already banked their votes and the Republican Party all waits till election day and we have another catastrophic failure, our votes just aren't coming, and we can't make up the margin. So I encourage people, have the people send it in. It doesn't mean that they're going to get to flip us to all mail without your voices being heard. We all know our legislators on both sides of the aisle. We have a 1-vote majority. It's not just the top of the ticket, which is urgent. It's the races close to you. It's the school board race. It's the county tax assessor. All these county races are on the ballot in Arizona this year. So the Board of Supervisors oversees election day. The county recorder, right, who oversees the voter list, all of these people are up for election.
In 2024?
In 2024. So if you want to effectuate change in the elections process for election day, your boards of supervisors are the people making those decisions about how that works. They appoint the elections director. If you're worried about the voter list not being accurate, that's your county recorder who's tasked with that. So all those people are going to be on the ballot. Don't give up the chance to go and vote and cast your vote to try to effectuate a positive change, because short of replacing the executive branch, as we know, that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to replace those seats, and that's the end of the political hat. Thank you.
Well, very good. I think that you gave a lot of information about what's going on in Arizona. You taught people about Voter Reference Foundation, and we're giving people actionable items. And right now, just the average voter, the simplest action item is to vote and to get other people also to go and vote. And then if they want to be involved with election integrity, maybe they're going, yeah, well, I'm going to vote, but what else can I do?
Yes.
There are places to go. You can be involved involved with Tea Party Patriots Action. You can go to Voter Reference Foundation and look at the voter rolls. And if you sign up with us for election integrity work, we connect you with the Election Integrity Network and other partners to help educate you and get you even more active.
Absolutely. And they say always be closing, right? Always be registering. So every time I take an Uber, I have a conversation. There's an app on my phone, Service Arizona in Arizona and in other states, every motor vehicle department in every state that has voter registration, right? North Dakota doesn't have voter registration. There's a site where people can register to vote online. So if you're talking to someone, you play chess with, or you're at the Boy Scouts, or you're at the ladies' lunch, or you're standing in the grocery line, or you're in an Uber, and conversation comes up about the economy, which is, of course, in a total shambles. I encourage people, and I say, for the presidential primary, if you have an interest in which candidate it is, in most states, and look up in your state whether that's open or closed. It's closed in Arizona. So we have an open primary, but not for the presidential preference election. So if you want to have a voice, people, and who the nominee is for president for the Republican Party, you need to register to vote as a Republican. So, and give people the tools so that they can register right there on the spot, and it's done. Because sometimes if people, you say, oh yeah, I'll do it, I'll get back to it, close on it right there. Thank you for all you do, Ms. Jenny Beth. I appreciate you greatly.
Well, thank you, Gina. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for all the work you do and all the many hats you wear.
My pleasure.
And we're so glad you joined the Jenny Beth Show today.
God bless you. Thank you, everybody.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin, produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, and directed by Luke Livingston. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org.
If you like this episode, let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment or a 5-star review. And if you want to be the first to know every time we drop a new episode, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications on whichever platform you're listening to. If you do these simple things, it will help the podcast grow, and I appreciate it very much.